The 2020s is thus far shaping up to be the decade of Bladee. Every year, this guy has put out at least one, if not multiple albums that each feel like another step forward in this post-Euro dream pop progressive trance cloud art trap gaze era of his career. It started with Exeter, a short little mixtape that felt like the next logical step forward for his sound. All of the drained out aesthetics from his previous works are still very much present, but there's less emphasis on trap rhythms and booming bass, and more on artsy-fartsy pop music. In fact, given that E, the most art pop centric album in the DG canon so far, released just a few months prior, it made sense to hear other members of the group go in this direction as well. He took an even deeper dive with 333, which despite still being under 40 minutes, felt larger in scope than any of his previous albums, while still emphasizing catchy hooks and mostly conventional song structures. The Smeg Boys have come a long way since the lo-fi foundational days of cloud rap, fusing other genres that add even more to the atmosphere. A good example of this is Blade's 2021 album The Fool, which added in these hard trance grooves that made it feel like an ecstasy-fueled rave in the Drain Dungeon. The group has strayed even further from cloud rap in the past year though, with the sugary synth-pop bliss of Crest, and one of Blade's most experimental albums yet, Spiderr. Despite barely being over half an hour in length, it's a pretty ambitious project. Within the first 20 seconds, he is already letting his listeners know that he feels more than some type of way. The beat on Understatement has this really hard to pin down groove with its numerous layers of drum and bass sections, yet it's all held together by this catchy video gamey synth part. In fact, it kind of sounds like he's tapping into the whole rage rap thing with its buzzing sound and dizzying atmosphere. His voice is also smoother and cleaner than ever, as his flow is completely natural and gives a lot of melody to this otherwise pretty chaotic track. Immediately after annihilating your mind with Olympic production gymnastics from White Armor though, we get a warm little rest stop with It's Okay to Not Be Okay. This is the shortest song here and is basically an interlude, but still adds variety to the album with the way it works an acoustic guitar sound into this cloudy dreamscape. It kind of reminds me of the opening track on 333, and makes me think that Bladee has the potential to drop a fire indie folk alternative rock project like Young Lean did. In fact, the next song, I Am Slowly But Surely Losing Hope, is probably the most rock-oriented track that I've heard from Bladee so far. It's carried by this synthetic pop-punky guitar lead and groovy bass line that work with the production to create a postmodern take on the genre. Blade's sounding like the confident frontman of a 2000s rock band, yet his vocals remain surprisingly subdued despite the loud instrumentation. We go back to slightly more conventional trap on Icarus 3 style, yet the beat here is still pretty freaky with its loud siren sounds and buzzing bass. It has a hook, despite freestyle being in the name of the song, but is still a good example of how much he's improved as a lyricist over the years. I especially like how he ends the second verse, referencing Icarus and Greek mythology. Perfection is just an illusion and a punishment of love. I'm standing solid every season, but it's not solid enough. Baby, you can kill me with a touch. I'm flying too close to the sun. Damn, damn, damn. Nothing is one of the more forgettable tracks in my opinion, as the beat occupies a pretty similar lane to the rest of the album without having a particularly memorable tune or captivating groove, but it is one of only 2 songs with a guest feature. I didn't know who Wunda Mountain was prior to hearing this album, but after listening to a song he did with Young Lean and reading half a Vogue article, he seems like a worthy addition to the GTB-SG cinematic universe. He sings in Mongolian half the time, which as someone who only speaks English, sounds pretty cool in context of this psychedelic artsy pop song. Bladee also brings back the 5-star crest motif from his previous album with Echo 2K, creating some linkage between this record and that one. In fact, I'd say this album kind of feels like a darker companion piece to Crest, as it's stylistically pretty similar and even has about the same runtime, only now Bladee is by himself and has too much time alone to think about the bleakness of life. Hopefully Echo drops a solo album this year too to complete the trifecta, that'd be pretty cool. Even with tracks like I Am Slowly But Surely Losing Hope and Haha, where he is on the brink of insanity, there's still a greater sense of optimism on this album than I'm used to hearing from Bladee. A good example of this is Blue Crush Angel, which instrumentally is admittedly one of the more mild exercises in ambient pop that I've heard from DG, but I think it flows well with the album, and stylistically fits the lyrics well. He looks back on his life and thinks about things he regrets, but knows that he has to live with them in order to survive. The hook even has a reference to Western Kabbalism. How fucking cool is that? This track also has some recurring lyrical motifs, like how he refers to a 333 and even says the number 3 3 times throughout the song. In fact, he's brought this up in his music numerous times over the last few years, as 333 is a symbol that refers to the mind, body, and soul, and represents growth with the help from a guardian angel. It's a cool motif that perfectly matches the sound and progression that this artist has and is currently going through.
We put gates up and we double up on guard. 9 is up. Golden falcons flying in silver, going 3-3 so bad. 3 + 3 + 3 is 9.
Echo 2K actually shows up on the next song, Disaster Prelude, speaking in Thai and letting us know that he is so high as F. The song's leading synth sounds like something that could have shown up on Crest, but the rest of the mix is really dark and jittery with its ominous backing vocals and weird sample. Lyrically, it's one of the more interesting cuts here, as Bladee and Echo trade spiritual bars that relate to their issues with addiction. The title of the song is fitting as well, as it comes right before what I think could become the most popular song on the album. This is where Bladee completely reaches his breaking point over one of the most distorted and fuzzy instrumentals on the album, digging deep inside of himself and trying to discover his true identity. It reminds me of the song Time off of E, where he shouts a simple phrase over and over to let out all of his frustrations. It's like a punk song, only instead of playing guitar, they play laptop. The lead single off the album, Drain Story, was kind of a weird choice for a single in my opinion. Not because the song isn't great, but because it feels more like a transitional cool down in context of the album than it does something that's made to be heard on its own. There's no hook in sight, it begins pretty abruptly, and it's not nearly as catchy as some of the other cuts here. In fact, this is probably one of the most disorienting beats that Bladee has ever sung over, with its unconventional hi-hat pattern and layers of synths that sound like they were taken from a bunch of different songs and then Frankenstein together. It actually sounds really cool though, and is fitting to the single art, which made me think that this album was going to go for a more crudely assembled SoundCloud rap type of thing, with the art pop tendencies that DG has picked up over the years. And in some ways, that's kind of what this album still feels like. It's not nearly as hooky or earwormy as something like Ice Dancer, 333, or even The Fool, but the production feels meticulously put together on every song despite how messy a lot of the compositions are. Velociraptor is another banger that furthers some of the lyrical themes involving spirituality and self-worth, and it also feels more like a punk song despite the synthetic instrumentation. Again, there's not really a hook, though there is this catchy little bridge that separates the verses. It's nothing new for Bladee to have really short songs on his projects that feel packed with ideas, but on this album in particular, the song lengths work in tandem with the more disjointed and abrasive sound to give us what is maybe his most anxiety-ridden project so far. And that's saying a lot. There's also a lot of references to religious imagery and introspection that relates to it, especially on the next track, Dresden ER. This is maybe the poppiest song here, but it helps the album's pacing tremendously, and is one of my favorite tracks in the style that he's made so far. Everything about it is really pretty, from the optimistic keyboard section, peppy drums, and melodic hook, as well as the lyrics, which talk about signs from God in the darkest of moments. It's a cozy little checkpoint in the track list that also happens to border the only two songs that aren't spelled with entirely uppercase letters. It does a good job of setting up the album's outro, as the last two songs are very gentle and quiet. She's Always Dancing brings back the acoustic guitar and sounds lovely when paired with the robotic vocal harmonies. It's the second shortest song here, but is still one of the most interesting, as the lyrics blatantly focus on drugs and how they make him feel disconnected from the physical world around him, but make him feel more connected with his inner psyche in the spiritual world. A similar statement can be made about the closer, Uriel outro, with its title and lyrics referencing Saint Uriel, over the most minimal backing track on the whole record. There's no percussion at all, instead opting for ambient synths that sound heavenly and somewhat cultish. It sums up the album's themes in a direct way that strips everything back, expressing his desire to become a perfect being, but not being able to feel whole. It's a calming way to end a generally chaotic album, and ties it together really nicely. Overall, while I don't think Spiderr has as many memorable songs as 333 or is as catchy as Crest, it's one of the most dense and bold projects that he's ever released. The music is otherworldly, with its mix of ambience, roaring synths, and unconventional rhythms, perfectly complementing the internal breakdown that Bladee is having throughout the record. We're hearing him dive into a whole new sound without abandoning his roots, and it's just really awesome to hear how much he's grown as an artist over the past few years. I look forward to hearing what else these guys have in store, and knowing what you all think of this new album here. Shout out to my buddy Jack Earl for making this thumbnail for the video. I'll link his channel in the description. And as always, if you enjoyed, you know the drill.
I looked behind as I heard a sigh, but this was the time of